Monday to honor these artists and hear a little bit more about what goes into making wonderful site-specific work. Just a few housekeeping things before I turn it over to Jill. If everyone could mute themselves, that would be wonderful, so we can hear the panel and that we don't get the background changing of speaker on the view. And then you're welcome to have your video on. You could have your video off. Do know that we're going to record the event. So if you don't want your face in any of the recording by any chance, please feel free to just shut your video function off so that we can't see your screen. And we'll have time later for some unmuting Q&A. And without further ado, take it away, Jill. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. My name is Jill Randall, and I'm the Artistic Director of Shawl-Anderson Dance Center in Berkeley. I know some of you through writing as well. I'm a dance writer for Dance Teacher, DIY Dancer, and my own site, Life as a Modern Dancer. And actually, the whole idea for today, I want to give credit to Rebecca, who was just speaking as we were thinking about Women's History Month and a celebration. She was like, let's talk about site-specific work, and especially with artists who have been doing this for many years, not just during the pandemic. And we're just so thrilled to have Lenora, Joanna, and Nina speaking today. Site-specific work is near and dear to my heart, and some of my favorite performing work with Nina was doing site-based work. So thank you so much for joining today. And in light of a very heavy time in our lives, I hope that the next hour can be an hour of hope and togetherness and inspiration. Please know that it is lunchtime for many, and this is very casual, so we fully understand that you're fitting this in, so please eat and drink as we have a conversation. I wanted to acknowledge that Shawl-Anderson is a nonprofit 63-year-old dance space based in Berkeley, California, and I hope you can visit us sometime in the coming months as we reopen. I myself am calling in today from Berkeley, and I want to acknowledge where I'm sitting and living on today, the land of the Ohlone, Muwekma, and Chochenyo people. I'd love for a second if everyone can use their chat and just to share two things. What inspired you to attend today, and where are you located today? So thanks for doing that a second so we can see who's in the room. Great. I hope you'll get to just scroll through the chat and just to catch a glimpse of who's in the room. And I love that it's the whole range of, we have some undergraduate classes joining today, art makers, people really immersed in site-based work. So thank you all for tuning in. I'd like to start off with asking each of the panelists just to share for a few minutes about who they are, and let's start with Joanna, please.
Oops, lost my voice there for a minute. I'm Joanna Haigood, and I'm Artistic Director of Zacco Dance Theater. I'm based in Bayview Hunters Point in San Francisco, celebrating my 41st year as director of the company. I've been doing site work pretty much this entire time. This has been my primary focus.
Thank you. Lenora.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lenora Lee, and I run a dance company called Lenora Lee Dance in San Francisco. The company's been around for 13 years, and we've been doing quite a bit of site-specific and immersive work throughout our time. Thanks.
Thank you. Nina.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nina Haft. I'm also a choreographer, and the year of coronavirus was the 20th anniversary of Nina Haft and Company, and some of my founding members are here today, including Jill Randall, and Lisa Bush, and Diane McCallop, and a bunch of other folks. I do site-specific work in combination with work that's designed for indoor spaces, and in recent, I would say in the last 10 to 15 years, my site work has really been essential to the research process of anything that I do indoors, and in and of itself, it's been a tremendous transformative practice for me. And Joanna is one of the first site-specific artists I had the opportunity to meet personally and to watch work, and it was life-changing. So I'm really excited to be here with her and other artists, especially Lenora.
Great, thank you so much. So we're going to try a little interactive piece. You maybe have done this in recent months on Zoom using a site called Menti. So just percolating some ideas and words when we think about site-specific dance. So if you're up for this and you have a phone handy, and if not, feel free just to catch this for a second. But my basic question for you is, what 3 words or phrases come to mind with site-specific dance? So in a second, I'm going to ask you on your phone to go to the website menti.com and plug in these 8 numbers, and then you'll put your words, and we'll build a word cloud that I'll put on the screen in a second. So I'm going to put in the chat, attempting to put in the chat. So Menti, M as in modern dance, E, N as in Nancy, T as in today, I as in inspiration, menti.com.
Put that in the chat, Jill. I can
Thank
drop it in
you.
again.
Thank you. And the number, I'm going to say it, and I've just put the Zoom. Well, you're here, you know the Zoom. The number is 11295473. So thanks for playing with me a second. So you can keep the Zoom open, and we'll check this out. It's a little choreography unto itself. Thanks for adding. So just some of the words coming to mind: location, community, unconventional, interacting with public, texture, senses, scale, support, physics, digging in the dirt, specific, earth, visual, commons, society. Thank you so much. Great. All right, so I'm going to start by asking a few questions, and then we will have a short break if you want to pop onto one of the videos or grab some food or a drink, and then we'll get into audience questions. Again, we're recording this. We have a few community members who couldn't make it today, and please write to me also if you would like the recording. All right, let's start off big and broad. Why site-specific dance? What drew you into site work? And If I may ask, if your audience members, if you can take your video off right now so that we can focus on the panel visually in front of us on the Zoom screen. Why site-specific dance? What drew you into site work?
Will I start? Okay. Well, I think for me, the main draw was the adventure. You know, getting outdoors, getting out of a studio, getting out of a theater, out of a prescribed space for performance seemed just like a great adventure, and having to retool each time was very challenging, and I really appreciated the challenge of kind of being in a position of rethinking and how I approach the content of the work. You know, that the context really did change the way that I strategized around the creation. And so that's what I mean by retooling. It's like sometimes I had to build on completely different techniques. And so, you know, over the course of 40 years, of course, there's so many other things that have come into play, you know, like scale, like time, dimensionality, weather, of course, and how all of these things and metaphor and all the various poetics that a site actually contains and offers to the creative process. So it's never dull. It's never easy. It's never the same, even though there are certain things that one learns over the course of many years or just in the practice. There's always something new to tackle. And I think that's true in any arts practice. I don't mean to say that this is like more adventure. I mean, that some people just find it in other places. I think that the use of a theater can be equally as challenging. But this is the place that this situation is what really inspires and pushes me in those ways.
Okay, go ahead and go next. All right. Well, I got my bachelor's degree at UCLA, and I had the pleasure of studying with Victoria Marx at a time where Victoria really pushed all of us to think about creating from our own experiences and the experiences of various different communities, thinking about dance outside of the theater. And so since college, I just felt it was a natural part of the process to consider performance in alternative spaces. And so throughout the years, it's just been exciting and thrilling, I think, to consider any space as a possible space to move, to dance. And over the years, I've developed really nice relationships with the National Park Service and California State Parks, and have been drawn to historic locations and thinking about the history of those locations, the architecture, who inhabited or worked there, or how many generations and what the generations, like the shift over time of who inhabited these spaces, and how does that inform the work, and how does that inform the energy of the space. So for me, it's really about uncovering the mysteries of different spaces and being inspired by them, inspired by what are the possibilities? What could the possibilities be? And thinking about creating experiences in these spaces. Yeah.
Well, I, in addition to sharing a lot of those interests that Joanna and Lenora mentioned, that I'm just gonna sort of group as reframing and being able to see with fresh perspective. I'm also really interested in how everyday life and everyday spaces require or invite us to execute choreography. We're making decisions, we're narrowing our options, we're bringing assumptions into what's possible and what's appropriate just by being in our bodies and occupying space. Occupying space is not a neutral act. And we still live in a world where people can be excluded and sometimes violently attacked for being outside after dark or crossing some unspoken line on a map. So for me, site work engages audience and performers in a more porous relationship, and it invites the audience, to be participants and to reflect. And I guess my hope is to have new insight about their own daily choreographic choices and what the values or the reasons for doing those movements might be. So for example, when Jill and I were working, and a number of other people here working in Mountain View Cemetery, that's a private space used for worship and reflection that happens to be like a public park where I often walk. It's near where I live. And that choreography of going to visit someone who has died and to actively remember them and memorialize them is a very particular kind of choreography. When I was looking at Joanna's video today, I was thinking about how exciting it is to inhabit religious spaces and spiritual spaces in ways that gently but definitely shatter our assumptions about what it is to be in the body and to be with our spirit. So site work really is kind of magical that way, and it takes a lot of groundwork to make it happen.
Thank you. So many artists have started exploring site-based work during the past year out of necessity and access to space. Also, more professors and K through 12 educators started exploring site-specific work in their classes. Can you share some examples of something you have seen or heard of over the past year, or someone you've mentored or offered advice to during this time about site-based work? And feel free to talk in any order.
Well, I'll just jump in and say that I feel like my students, because I also teach, I teach at Shawl-Anderson Dance Center, and I also teach at Cal State University East Bay. And I've been just moved and inspired by the readiness for students to make work in their most intimate and personal spaces, AKA their bedrooms. And I think that people have done this before. In fact, I was reading a book this year by Gabrielle Seville, and she talks about a group that she was a part of, a collective where they deliberately made performance in their bedrooms because of the radical magic that can happen in those intimate spaces. And I feel like it's really shown me a lot of courage in that act.
Well, I, in the earlier part of the pandemic, excuse me, I was a part of a cohort of site artists in various media, from art, visual arts, and choreography and theater and so on. That was put together by Annie Hamburger in New York. And so there was a lot of really interesting conversation about what people were doing. Some people, of course, were making work in their rooms and documenting them through video and sharing. Some people were out in the streets creating actions that were in support of first responders, creating portable platforms that they could move along the street. Some people were dreaming about these larger scale projects where they can work in several acres of land and separating people. So there's a lot of really interesting solutions. And I got together with a couple of artists, Gabrielle Torres, who's a performance artist in New York, and Corinne Wicks, who's a choreographer in LA. And we spoke about, like, particularly with this medium of Zoom, how do we create this a sense of intimacy, when we're all isolated? How do we connect with people in an intimate ways? Most of us are sitting in these forums and having these discussions in this way. And we've been developing this site that hopefully will come out at some point. It's one of the spare time projects right now, but based on something that my ex-husband and I would do. We were often separated from each other, but we would send each other these exercises that we would do exactly at the same time in different places in the planet. And we would research our sites where we were and incorporate the places. So it would be something like experiencing a place through the lens of someone else. And you'd be doing that simultaneously. So anyway, we came together, and they've had so many interesting inputs into this idea. And of course, they're much younger and have so many more resources to draw from that I am completely unaware of and still trying to figure out how to navigate on the thing. But it's been an interesting problem to solve, how to stay connected, like with family members and with loved ones and with just acquaintances, in this time of great isolation. So anyway, that's just something that we've been doing and that I've been learning quite a bit through the process of exploring the idea with others.
I can share an example of something that I saw, a theater piece that I saw. It was presented by Arts Emerson in Boston, and the company was Arlequin Players. Originally, they were supposed to do a solo theater work inside one of the venues, but due to the pandemic, they had to switch it completely into something that they ended up live streaming that had audience involvement. And it was quite fascinating. It was a piece where the main character was a woman who was incarcerated, and the backdrop were two white walls. And the audience were the jury, basically. And so they did have some interactive components to it, which was fascinating. And the jury has the opportunity to share their verdict at the end. But they integrated this live streaming as well as kind of live multimedia mix at the same time. And I thought that was very fascinating. And then during the Q&A afterwards, they shared their setup, which was really the director and the main character are a couple. This was their living room. They set up 2 cameras in the living room and it looked completely professional. It was quite fascinating. So yeah, it was 2 white walls, and she's using chalk to draw on the walls in addition to this layer of video texture that occurs throughout the piece. And it was pretty fascinating how semi-low tech it was, but how they were able to transform something that was meant to be in the theater quickly into something that was live streamed. And I thought that was really effective. And they ended up performing it many, many times. It did quite well, and went on tour virtually.
Thank you. Next question, and I want to thank Nina for helping me wrangle with some of these ideas in the last few days. How does making and presenting site-specific work reveal, challenge, or transform the barriers and power structures in dance and/or in the places where you work? So one more time, how does making and presenting site-specific work reveal, challenge, or transform the barriers and power structures in dance or in the places where you work?
I'll jump in with some thoughts. I think one of the most obvious is that it broadens the visibility to potentially a larger and broader general public, an audience population, particularly those who may not choose to go to a theater or are not comfortable, or that's just kind of not something that they regularly do, that there's a potential in site-specific work, depending where the site is, garnering a lot more visibility from, say, people who weren't necessarily there to see the performance, but are passersby or whatnot. And then also, depending on where the audience is situated, it really breaks barriers between performers and audience. It can potentially break barriers. For example, I've been fascinated with immersive work in recent years, and that in the way that we kind of structure that, the audience really has free reign to follow the performers around and be in very close proximity at certain times. And I think that provides much more of a, not a witness perspective, but really a participant perspective. And I think that's something that I've been fascinated with, is like, how do we break the barriers between, you know, performers and audience, but also welcome them in as to see, because I do a lot of, it's kind of narrative-based work, to be a participant, and how do you see it from the inside? So breaking down the they, us, and them, or we and the other, and think about how do we look at ourselves as a collective, and we're setting up the scenario for others to step into and to provide an experience for. So I think site-specific work has a lot of potential for, breaking down those more traditional structures.
Well, I guess I'll just add, because Lenore, I think that you articulated this really well. I mean, I think that there are the power structures in dance, but then of course I could just kept thinking about the social political structures and like what the impact is there. And given the fact that, you know, places are really assigned meaning based on their histories and our perceptions and our personal experiences, but that they carry a very specific weight based on those things. And you know, when art actually engages or promotes dialogue around the issues that are directly related to that site, or, you know, it acts as a really powerful metaphor, and gives focus to the context for, you know, protest or affirmation, and ultimately can play a role towards, you know, some type of social change. I mean, it's funny thinking about, just thinking about the dance structures, and I immediately went to access, you know, I think was what Lenora was speaking about, like who has access to art, and to cultural experiences, particularly when the work is free and is in public spaces. That just opens up a whole new opportunity for engagement, sharing, communing, and being in community with people, which I think traditionally, although I think we've come a long way since certainly the beginnings of my practice, you know, in democratizing what art is, if that's really a right way to put it. But it's just creating access, making art more about righteous connection between people. And so, then I think about presenters, and I don't know, that structure is still really tough, because presenting, you know, art, this type of art making, it can be very expensive and very, very difficult. And partnership is still so important, and yet I think there's still a lot of resistance with some presenters because of the complexity of this type of art, and I do feel like there's needs a lot more work and protect and frankly, I think that one of the silver linings of COVID, and that's kind of an odd term really, because it's been such an extraordinary struggle on so many levels, but that there's a new awakening, I guess, or an awakening presenters of the value of this type of art making, and also yeah, and has kind of opened up the their understanding of what role they can play. So larger presenting organizations like Jacob's Pillow, for instance, even though they have had art that has been, somewhat site based at their campus, are thinking more broadly about what that can actually mean and how they present work. And that's the case for many, many other presenters. So anyway, kind of rambling, but blah, blah, there you go.
I don't have much to add, except that I feel like a lot of the site work I've had the opportunity to see, both Lenora's and Joanna's, has for me raised that question about what are the stories that we're not being told. It reveals my assumptions about what does something look like, or who was here. For example, what does it mean to be an immigrant? If there's an understanding of who those people are and where they came from, well, guess what? There's lots of other people that we just didn't happen to cross paths with. And bringing those stories alive can really change the way I personally see a space. The project that Joanna did, that she and welcomed me, I asked and she said yes for me to come in and watch her working on, was ghost architecture at YBCA. And I knew nothing about how all of those skyscrapers had ended up in the South of Market area. And it recontextualized why a lot of Filipino Americans and veterans had been displaced to certain areas around the city. So now when I'm in the city, I understand a longer timeline of displacement. I don't just see big buildings and smaller buildings and the people who happen to be in them. And like Lenora, when I've done work outside in public spaces, my most recent big project was at the Hayward Shoreline. And it's astounding to me how different groups believe that they have ownership or control of land that really it belongs to the plants and animals and the indigenous people who were there in the first place. And yet to make an event happen that takes care of those values, the first interface is having to deal with the permits and the people who say, yes, you can do this, no, you can't do that. Well, now that I know that this is going to have this impact, I'm changing the rules. And you're always negotiating with power structures in the community. So I'm glad that dance is starting to see this as an important and transformative practice, not just something that's unusual.
I just wanted to add something briefly while I was hearing you both talk. I thought about this piece that I worked on recently. It's called Within These Walls. We created on Angel Island, and there's a former US immigration station there. And I would have to say that one of the most powerful parts about doing a piece in there, inspired by the processing and detention of many peoples, but specifically of the Chinese during a certain period of time between 1910 and 1940, was that the response that we got from audience members was that once they stepped in, they could feel the weight of what that building held, kind of all the stories and the history behind it, and that itself really kind of blew them away physically, having a very visceral, physical, and a kind of emotional response to just being in that space. And when we consider telling the stories of the experiences that occurred within particular spaces, and giving that some breath and some voice. There's, I feel like a much added power to that because they can feel it from the environment. Those stories live in the walls, you know, and people, hundreds of thousands of people were processed there. So it's not something I think that is just singularly represented by a project, but is really about representing masses of people. And because certain pieces can have that weight to it, I think people can feel that automatically. So when we consider, okay, what is the intent behind our work, and what is it that we want to bring forward? What is it we're interested in sharing? I feel particularly at this time, there's a lot that artists need to kind of sort through in terms of what is our impact and how do we continue forward? How do we continue to create work and maintain connections, build connections while we're still so far apart from each other? And I think it really drives us to consider that. What is our intent when we create work, and what motivates us to keep going, and what is it that we want to share? Those are some thoughts.
Thank you. Great. So we choreographed in a short little break, which can serve a variety of things. Sometimes sharing dance videos via Zoom can be really glitchy. So we thought if you wanted to bring a little art into the room, if you haven't gotten to look at the links that the artist shared, you might click on one of the ones I'm about to put in the chat, and you can watch for just the few minutes we're taking a break, just to connect with some of the art. Also, feel free to just stand up and stretch, move, dance for a few minutes. And then third, this is the moment to start to formulate some questions. So when we come back, California time, it's 12:41. We'll be back here at 12:46. It will be time for audience questions. So you're welcome to place questions in the chat. Also, if you'd like to be called on and unmuted, we'd love to hear from you directly. So I'm going to put the 3 links. These were the ones that I shared this weekend in the email as well. Feel free to click on a link, go to it, and then come back. If by chance you're kicked out of Zoom, just resubmit yourself in, and Rebecca and I will let you in. So 5-minute break. Here we go. Thanks. All right, we're coming back onto the Zoom. Also, as we're regathering, I highly encourage you to check through the chat, that there have been some related resources and events mentioned. And I will try to recap those and send a note to all participants tomorrow. If by chance, I know a few people got a direct link today from a colleague or a professor. If by chance you weren't on the original RSVP list, and if you can put in the chat and you can message just to me, Jill, your email, I'll gladly include you on the list. All right, so let's go into some questions. And as we mentioned on the event link, we might go as late as 1:15. We'll just naturally see how the questions go. So if you feel comfortable putting in the chat your question, that's great. Also, if you want to say, I have a question, can you call on me? I would love to do that. All right, I'm going to start with Amelia's question. In the beginning stages, how do you honor the land space you are about to create in? Also, then, what does the logistical side ask for, such as permitting? So one more time, in the beginning stages, how do you honor the land space you are about to create in? And what does that look like on the logistical side, such as permitting? And with our Q&A panelists, all three of you are welcome to add in, or if one or two, it's all wonderful. Thank you.
Sure, I'll jump in. So a lot of times when I'm interested or inspired by a space, I'll sit with it for a while. I'll just be in the space alone for long periods of time, walk around, walk through it, and just try to let my intuition flow in terms of what I could see. And also I just kind of intuitively ask, okay, what is this space bringing up? So allowing, whether it's imagery or thoughts, to just kind of surface through intuition. And usually I'll get a good sense of whether or not it would be appropriate for us to work in this space, just in terms of thinking about a project. If it's a little bit farther along the road, I would probably see if it falls under whose jurisdiction in terms of, is it the national parks? Is it the California State Parks? Does this fall under Park and Rec? And then look into a permitting process and contacting the appropriate people. Sometimes they do have, like, National Park Service has an Arts in the Park program, but they all typically require some type of event permit and working in conjunction with staff there in order to do rehearsals and performances. It's kind of a combination of things, but it's nice when you're able to establish a relationship and then be able to do multiple projects in working with these staff members. That's kind of how I start the process.
I'm going to pose another question. This was Latanya's question in the chat. How does the healing impact of your work ripple through the community represented in your work? How does the healing impact of your work ripple through the community represented in your work?
That's, I think, a little tricky to quantify, but I think particularly with projects that deal with community issue, my hope is, of creating some kind of a platform or a kind of a safe space where some of the issues can be expressed and discussed and held together as a community. And I think sometimes through that process of deep communication, I think being able to release tensions, um, to be heard, to feel as if you have a voice, that becomes part of a much larger process of healing. It's just like, healing isn't just one event. It's one event that leads to a specific ability or opening or opportunity to address something that supports the next thing, and to, so it's like a flower blooming, um so that's, yeah, that process. I it's my hope that the process that I have created and that platform supports those larger efforts towards the healing.
One experience that I had that I think might fit this question is that when we were working in Mountain View Cemetery, one part of the performance happened near a fountain with a youth percussion orchestra that was directed by one of the dancers, is also a music teacher at a middle school. And people who both were visiting the cemetery in order to honor a loved one, and also people who came to see the public performances, saw that as a way to honor the cycle of life and to find memorializing those who have died as a hopeful act, not only an act of mourning.
I think part of this is for the projects that I work on, and typically I'll do a certain amount of research and interview various different communities, and then select what I feel is most compelling to share with the public, and we integrate some of their interview voiceover in the sound score. And so I think a lot of it is providing that voice, and it may become a collage of multiple voices. That's not only, I would say, not only healing for that particular community, but for any, there are different ways to connect for any and all of the witnesses or audience members. And I think there's healing in many different ways. It's kind of, it multiplies, and it's just not only in the space that you're in, but then everybody who has witnessed it on any given day in some ways is affected by it. And I think that spreads wider and more broadly. One other thought I had to the previous question was that I think the way I approach different spaces also is that, we're not there to inhabit the space, to use the space. And, I think if we consider that we're just there to come into rhythm with the space for a particular amount of time to, I think it's kind of about what is your intention in being in that space? And is it a respectful one? Is it understanding and respecting the space in its totality, and that you are just the speck inside that space? Yeah.
Beautiful. Pulling Joanna's question from the chat. Joanna had a question about the intersection of set choreography and scored event that allows for and actually might embrace integration of unexpected elements. Set choreography versus scores.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
And Joanna, if you want to unmute yourself, feel free to, if I wasn't, if I can have your help with the question. Thanks.
Okay.
Sure. Do you want me to clarify?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Well, my personal perspective is that my site is a sentient creature, non-human creature. We work with horses, and but I have to say the first site work I ever made was when I was living in Seattle, and we made a piece for these benches downtown, and we rehearsed downtown, but the days that we went to perform, all these homeless people were sleeping on the benches, and my dancers discovered the joy of having to actually think in real time and revamp the choreography in the moment. And it opened up a whole thought to me. And then, of course, now I'm working with horses, and you really have to be working in real time with them. So I'm curious, because there's a way of sort of absorbing what happens in the moment in site work that doesn't happen when you're separated by a fourth wall.
I think you answered your own question, Joanna. Yay! So nice to see you. But that is true. There's a lot of unexpected going on, particularly when you're in very public spaces, and it's impossible to, to hold a specific choreography or even a timing of things. And that's the beauty of it. It's alive. And that is varied from site to site, mind you. Some of the remote sites in nature, you're maybe running into certain animals. That has happened plenty of times also. But yeah, anyway, I think you answered that question so beautifully.
I would say that for myself, the more that I have created in a site-specific way, the more confident I've become about that being a compositional framework for making performance. And it's, in fact, I think what keeps the performance really alive and active and engaged for the performers. And it literally includes the audience. The site-specific piece that we did at the Hayward Shoreline, our rehearsal schedule was really based on weather, like was it raining or not, and when the dancers could get together and commute around traffic patterns in the Bay Area. So we were rehearsing at an unpredictable pattern of times, and we ended up having to change everything we did because high tide, low tide, things would end up on the beach, things would disappear from the beach, and it became apparent to me that was the choreography, which was to be in relationship with the tide, which was a big piece of why we were there in the first place, was to embody that relationship, to remember to embody that relationship. So those scores became crucial to really realizing the intention that Lenora was speaking about why we were in the space, rather than imposing something. Oh, wouldn't it be cool if we did something on the shore?
Yeah, I would just have to add to that being in public spaces and doing both site-specific or site-responsive and immersive work, it's I feel like it mirrors more of real life and kind of all the unexpectedness that you deal with on a day-to-day basis, and that, you know, there's just so much that's out of your control, and to think that performance only lives in a bubble is very unrealistic, you know, and so many, probably all over the world, the indigenous or various different cultures, are just much more integrated. Like the live performance may be more integrated into everyday life, but you know, I think in society here, it's been separated out a bit. So I think, yeah, definitely, as Joanna mentioned, there's the beauty in that. And I think it's exciting to roll with all the unpredictability, and it makes you a better improviser. You know, I think it makes every performance unique and exciting for the performers as well. I think these are fun issues that you have to deal with. I mean, they're not always fun, but they can be quite exciting. Yeah.
Thank you. Alexandra's question in the chat, one of my favorite topics too, is sight dance audience. What are some, so there are a few questions in the question. What are some ideas and strategies you've discovered for anticipating how an audience might move through a space that takes up a lot of land? What are some takeaways that you've discovered from live performance in how to lead or direct an audience through a site with your work? The choreography of the company.
I think there are so many different ways to think about what, you know, like the term in architecture would be circulation, how people are circulating around a space. You know, some of it has to do with the shape of the pathways that you're creating. Some of it can be with the way people actually guide people through, you know, an audience through a space. Some of it can be done with markings and maps. There are many ways to create a logic for people to hold and to navigate with. But as from the previous question, there's always going to be a certain unpredictability about the way someone will respond. Some people like to push, you know, constraints, so they will wander outside the line. But there are ways to deal with that too, you know, without feeling. And most of that has to do with the way what your support crew is, you know, and how those we'll say in more traditional sense would be an usher, but a guide, you know, what their performance role actually is. And sometimes it's the performers, that the performers play an important part of how people move through a space. So I think the depth of also engagement with the content of the work sometimes really plays an important part. You know, how the site itself really moves, how it's integrated with the material. So I think every site offers a different opportunity to try to solve that problem, but it is I would say, as it's an equal part of the creative process, you know, the way that you are engaging and negotiating, you know, the way people will naturally move or not. So that makes a huge difference in the way that the work is actually experienced. So it's part of the design on a very large level.
I'm going to pull Maleshio's comment and questions out, and I think this will be a nice way to conclude our time together. Maleshio noted, I love this panel of women, and I also think of Joe Kreider, Amelia Rudolph, and Sarah Shelton-Mann here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Is there something to say about this gender specificity, female identified artists who have been making such amazing, who have been such amazing leaders in these movements?
I might just add one other thing to the last question. If we're thinking about a very large area of land that you're wanting to stage a piece in, just considering the amount of time it might take for people to travel and accessibility, physical accessibility, you know, are there different stations where performance occurs, or does performance occur kind of throughout a route? But considering the time it takes for audience members to travel, if things are being mounted throughout this large space. Also, what I found kind of crucial to the process leading up to when the work premieres is having multiple trials with test audience members, because having a lot of feedback in terms of what the audience experiences before the piece opens is very helpful in being able to tweak and adjust and make sure that any loose holes that you hadn't thought about get paid attention to prior to it being public. So as many test trials with audience members and friends, I think is pretty crucial to see what the experience is like.
Well, to attempt at answering that question from Maleshio, I think there's certainly plenty of really extraordinary men who are making site work. I think Stephen is somewhere in the mix here, and I would put him among that group. But I think women are really great listeners, that we have a certain patience, which I think really lends itself well to this work, that this ability for the quieting and not being afraid of intuition. That intuition is something that is definitely a great positive force in this work. And I feel that we as women, we've been gifted with these qualities, or these characteristics, these I think essential qualities. So I don't really know why we're here, but I think that these are things that really make the experience very, very meaningful. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I was thinking something similar along the lines of listening and problem solving as a
Problem
kind
solving. Yes, we're really good problem solvers.
yeah.
Yeah.
I am not a parent, but I think of, and I think that dads do this too, but I think there's something about mothering that is a very deep form of intuitive, embodied, nonverbal listening and pattern recognition, understanding something that's not coming out in words, but is emerging and evident. And then being very practical and concrete about, okay, how are we going to make this safe, make this fun, make this worthwhile, have an intentional outcome that is a boon.
Yeah.
My mom does that. I hope that I get to practice that a bit as an artist.
one thing that I've noticed with women friends who are strong leaders, that oftentimes their ability to collaborate is very high, and their ability to take in perspective and opinions and thoughts and suggestions from a broad scope of people, and to be able to incorporate that into the process of making decisions. And I think it's really beneficial when you're working in groups, but also to provide a much broader scope and perspective to the work itself. I think people like the artists and dancers and collaborators I feel more invested in the work when there's not like a hierarchy where their voice is not taken into account. So I felt that the work has become stronger because of everybody's voices involved, not only from the artistic team, but in a broader way from the communities that we're a part of, or the communities we're investigating, and then in the spaces that we work in.
But men do rock in this art form, just saying. Okay.
Well, I just want to thank the panel for your generosity of spirit and sharing about your work. And if you haven't gotten to go on their sites and look at some of the videos, I really hope you can this week. I see some people doing this in the chat, and I highly encourage you. There are so many wonderful people on this call with resources, whether you're leading a workshop, there are people who have written books who are on this call, or articles. I love sharing resources, and if you have a moment to share something in the chat, we'll add it in the email to folks this week. I also was just remembering a resource list I had just made for a colleague as well that I'll share. But I really want to thank Nina, Joanna, and Lenora for your time today. And I thank everyone on the call for joining in, and please stay in touch. I hope you'll continue to follow Shawl-Anderson Dance Center, and we have had beautiful site-specific works in our big house, which is now 4 studios as well. And I hope you will keep making art and experiencing art in these coming weeks and months.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. That was awesome.
Thanks, Cassandra.
Okay, good to see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I don't want to leave. I like being with you all. I thought that went really well. Thank you for inviting me. Lenora,